They thought you'd stay broken. They thought you'd beg, cry, and keep dancing to the rhythm of their chaos. That you'd keep shrinking just to fit the small space they allowed you in their world. But what they never predicted was your awakening, your silence. Your refusal to keep bleeding for someone who feeds on your wounds. This video isn't about revenge. It's not about fighting fire with fire. It's about something far more powerful. The quiet revolution that begins the moment you stop playing their game. Because here's the truth. When you reclaim your energy, your voice, your peace, they lose. Not through drama, not through final words, but through the one thing they can't handle. You choosing yourself with calm, unapologetic clarity. So stay with me. This is not just another video. This is a roadmap out of manipulation and into mastery. I'll walk you through the exact emotional shifts that turn your silence into strength, your boundaries into armor, and your story into one that no longer part of. If you've ever been entangled with a narcissist, if you've ever doubted your worth because someone else made you feel small, hit that subscribe button and watch until the end. You're about to see what happens when you stop giving your power away and finally take it back. Part 1, they can't control the one who has awakened. They were never afraid of losing you. They were afraid of you waking up. That's what truly terrified them. Not your departure, but the moment you paused amid the chaos and saw everything for what it truly was. Words dressed as love, but soaked in manipulation. Gestures of care, rooted in control. Apologies never backed by change. You were no longer the puppet in their hands. And in that moment, you became the greatest threat to the world built on lies. They once made you believe you were weak, too sensitive, too much for anyone else to handle. But now you look back and realize they were the fragile ones all along. Only the weak need to manipulate to feel powerful. Only the insecure need others to doubt themselves to maintain control. And you saw through them, not with rage, but with unpredictable silence. You no longer chase explanations. You no longer send long messages just to be understood. You no longer lie awake at night wondering, what did I do wrong? Your silence doesn't come from emptiness. It comes from wholeness. You don't need them to hear you anymore. You don't need you to listen. They thought you'd never dared to leave, but they were wrong. And the biggest mistake wasn't hurting you, it was underestimating your capacity to rise. They believed one more round of gaslighting would pull you back. But this time you didn't return. You walked away with the calm of someone who has seen all they need to see and no longer needs to argue. What's killing them slowly isn't your absence, it's your refusal to react. They crave emotion. You give them indifference. They provoke. You stay composed. They try to play the victim, but you're no longer in the play. They don't know what to do with someone who's cut off the supply and chosen truth over their recycled script. What they fear most isn't losing you, it's losing power over you. Losing the ability to make you cry, tremble, or feel guilty. They're not afraid of your silence. They're afraid of the strength growing quietly within it. And because in that silence, you are healing. You are rebuilding the walls they once tore down. And this time, you're not building to let others in. You're building to protect your peace. They thought they had won, but that was an illusion. True victory is when you no longer need them to lose. When you stop playing the game, when you walk away. Not in drama, not in rage, but in silence. No grand goodbye, no perfect closure. Just freedom. Part 2, the power of not reacting. Don't mistake silence for surrender. In the world of a narcissist, nothing is more brutal than your lack of reaction. Because to them, your emotions are a lifeline. They don't need your love. They just need your reaction. Whether it's love, anger, tears, or begging, as long as you're emotionally invested, you're still under their control. And then one day you change. You're no longer angry, no longer screaming for justice. You're just silent. A silence not born of helplessness, but of understanding. You've seen through the truth behind every argument, every toxic cycle of hurt and fake reconciliation. You no longer care to win or lose. You just want peace. That's when they begin to spiral. They had learned to read your every expression, every reflex, every unhealed wound. But now there's nothing left for them to exploit. No anger, no tears, no long midnight texts. Only you're calm, silent, no longer playing their game. This is not coldness. This is clarity. You don't need to shout to prove you figured them out. You don't need to write 100 justifications to be understood, because you understand now, and that unsettles them more than anything. The one they thought was the weakest is now the one they can no longer read. They'll try everything to pull you back. When charm fails, they'll threaten. When threats fail, they'll play the victim. When that fails, they'll say you've changed, and you'll nod without saying a word. Because yes, you have. No more begging. No more pleading for empathy from someone incapable of it. No more trying to explain truth to someone who survives on distortion. You've stopped playing a game you were never meant to win. You're not surrendering. You're withdrawing with intention, with awareness, and with power. You choose not to respond. Not because you have nothing left to say, but because you've already said enough. Anything more would only be an excuse for them to drag you into another loop of manipulation. You no longer give them that chance. You've cut the supply, and that's what leaves them in despair. People often think strength means standing up and fighting back, but sometimes the greatest strength lies in not reacting, not arguing, not needing to prove anything, just walking away in silence. And in that silence, you reclaim what they tried to steal all along. Feel freedom. Part 3, boundaries are not to divide, but to protect. Boundaries are not rejection. They are a declaration of your worth. When you start setting boundaries, they don't understand. They'll say you've changed. They'll call you cold, selfish, distant. But the truth is, they were never used to you having limits. From the very beginning, they were given control. They walked into your emotions like a house with no locked doors. Very soon, you'd always stay open, always forgive, always adjust to keep them comfortable. But now you are different. Not because you've become rigid, but because you've awakened from the spell of sweet manipulation. You're no longer willing to twist yourself just to maintain a false peace. You pay with pain, with exhaustion, with the loss of your self-worth, and you've learned a hard truth. Kindness without boundaries will be drained to the bone by toxic people. You start saying no, a short word, but with immense power. And you don't explain, not because you don't care, but because you know a narcissist isn't looking for understanding. They're looking for cracks to slip through. Every justification you offer becomes a loose thread they pull to unravel the very foundation of trust and resolve you've just rebuilt. They don't listen to understand, they listen to twist, to make you doubt yourself. So you stopped explaining. You begin to guard your energy like a warrior defends sacred borders. You no longer answer midnight calls. You no longer engage in empty conversations just to keep the peace. You no longer accept invitations laced with emotional punishment. And yes, that will make them furious. They'll try to break you. They'll call you cruel. They'll weaponize guilt because it's their favorite tool. They know if they can make you feel guilty, you'll tear down your own fence just to soothe the tension. But this time you don't. You hold your ground. You understand, the anger isn't genuine. It's resistance to losing the privilege of ownership. You're not building walls to shut people out. You're creating boundaries to protect the sacred space within yourself. Because you've lived too long in a world where your feelings were managed, your limits ignored, and you were taught that love means accepting the worst in others. But real love doesn't require you to sacrifice your mental health to hold on to a broken relationship. From now on, every time you say no, you're saying yes to yourself. Every time you ignore a manipulative message, every time you walk away from an apology with no change behind it, you're declaring, I deserve better. You don't need to argue to be respected. You don't need to justify any boundary you set. Your peace is reason enough. And when they finally realize you're no longer easy to break, no longer easy to control, no longer willing to let it slide for the sake of harmony, that's when they know the game is over. Part 4, let them battle the void alone. They'll try everything to pull you back, but you vanish from their map. When you withdraw in silence, no reaction, no longer feeding the toxic emotional loop, a massive void begins to form within them. Not because they loved you, but because they lost what they considered their energy supply, your emotions, your pain, your resistance. When you go silent, they panic. They don't understand the calm logic of someone who has chosen to let go. To them, silence isn't a noble decision. It's a devastating blow they cannot counter. They'll scramble for tactics, surprise messages, half-hearted apologies, rare displays of affection, those same old tricks they once used to reel you back in. But this time, you don't respond, and your absence becomes the greatest punishment, one they cannot control. They can no longer define you as the reactive one, the sensitive one, or the one who needs them, because now you no longer belong to their narrative. You no longer exist in the script where they are the lead and you are the dependent shadow. Your departure needs no announcement. It doesn't require a verbal goodbye, because the act of cutting ties completely, no warning, no explanation, carries the weight of a decision made through tears, through loss, and through silent growth. And when they realize you're no longer within their reach, they'll try to rewrite the story. They'll tell others that you're heartless, that you abandoned them. They'll twist the narrative, as they always do. But it doesn't affect you anymore because you no longer live to defend your reputation against those who thrive on distortion. You live to protect your peace from those who manipulate truth. You don't owe them a final chance. They had hundreds, too many for you to count. And this time what they can't stand is the simple truth. You left without needing them to understand why. No more explanation, no more arguments, no more playing a side character than the story they wrote for their ego. You didn't walk away to get revenge. You walked away because you finally realized you deserve a story without manipulation, without exhaustion, and without them. 5. Part 5, silence is a language. Not reacting doesn't mean you feel nothing. It means you're in control of yourself. Don't confuse silence with weakness. It's not giving up, it's a deliberate choice. Because you've already tried everything. Explaining, enduring, crying, forgiving, communicating. But nothing can change someone who never intended to change. And then you realize true strength isn't about getting them to understand. It's about refusing to let them keep influencing you. When you stop reacting, that's when you start reclaiming control. Narcissists operate by feeding on other people's emotions. They create drama to spark anger. They go silent to trigger anxiety. They send cryptic messages to trap you in overthinking. But when you choose not to respond, not to analyze, not to chase an explanation, you cut the strings they've always used to manipulate your emotions, and that terrifies them. They don't know what to do. When you don't cry, don't call, don't rage, they can't read your mind, can't predict your next move. For them, you become boring because they no longer play the role they cast you in. But in reality, you're not boring. You're rebuilding, silently, steadily, with newfound inner power. You no longer served your emotions on a silver platter for them to destroy. Now you practice restraint. You've learned to speak less, feel more deeply, and choose wisely where you place your energy. When they bait you with provocative questions, you respond with gentle indifference. When they crave drama, you answer with stillness. This is not avoidance. This is emotional maturity. Your silence is a wordless declaration. I'm not playing this game anymore. You withdraw, not because you've lost, but because you're no longer interested in a war where no one wins. You're not trying to change them. You're not trying to flip the script. Instead, you're doing what they never expected. You walk away from the play they directed, and you start writing your own script where you are no longer the control character. Part 6. Don't seek validation from someone who exists to deny you. You don't need an apology. You need freedom. The painful truth is, a narcissist never intends to offer a sincere apology because in their eyes, they're never wrong. If they say, I'm sorry, it's not out of remorse, it's out of fear of losing control. They apologize to keep you around, not to heal, but to reopen the door for the next round of manipulation. And you, the one who once waited for an explanation, for acknowledgement, for a moment of awakening from them, had to learn a costly lesson. Sometimes the thing you need most will never come. Not because you're unworthy, but because they're incapable of giving it. You thought if you were patient enough, genuine enough, they would finally understand. But then you realize you cannot wake someone who chooses to stay asleep on your pain. And in that moment, you stopped, not because you gave up, but because your eyes were finally open. You stopped trying to seek justice from someone who uses truth as a tool for distortion. You stopped seeking closure because you finally understood closure doesn't come from their mouth. It comes from your own decision. You decide you don't need one last conversation. You don't need them to understand why you left. You don't need them to validate that your pain was real, because that validation came from your own heart. But heart now strong enough to withhold forgiveness from those who never valued it. People often ask, did you forgive them? Forgiveness isn't a public announcement. Forgiveness is something you give yourself when you stop expecting justice from a place where it doesn't exist. And sometimes forgiveness begins when you walk away, not with hatred, but without looking back. You don't need applause for your bravery. You just need to keep walking step by step out of the nightmare and closer to your freedom. And if anyone asks why you disappeared without a goodbye, let the answer be, because I waited too long for a sentence they never intended to say. Your silent exit is not a retreat. It is a return to yourself. Part 7, when you stop being the nice one. They were used to the version of you that was obedient, quiet, and easily appeased. But that person no longer exists. You used to step back. You used to lower your voice. You used to apologize for things you didn't even do. just to preserve a relationship you mistook for love. They called you too sensitive whenever you expressed genuine emotion. They said you were too much whenever you asked for honesty. They made you believe that having personal boundaries was some form of attack. But now you no longer bow your head. You no longer shrink yourself to fit the warped mold they created. This change unsettles them. They call you cold, selfish, too strong. But the truth is, they'd never met this version of you, the one they can't manipulate, the version of you that knows their worth, the version of you that no longer feels the need to be understood by someone who constantly invalidated you. You don't yell, you don't argue, you simply change, quietly but firmly. You stop replying to the same old messages that follow the same old script. You stop reacting to their predictable provocations. You stop giving them the privilege of witnessing your pain. And in that silence, you begin reclaiming every piece of your strength they once shattered with sweet but hollow words. They'll try to soften you again, a soft message, a belated apology, a rare act of kindness they never showed before. But this time, your heart stays guarded. Not because you're cruel, but because you've learned how to protect it from hands that never knew how to hold it with care. You're not heartless. You're someone who forgave too many times without ever seeing change. You gave, listened, kept the peace, until you lost yourself in the process. Now, you're slowly reclaiming every part of yourself you once sacrificed in pursuit of validation from someone who never planned to give it. They don't hate you because you changed. They hate you because you finally started loving yourself. And that is something they'll never be able to control. Ace. Part H. You're no longer in the story they tell. You erased them from your story, and that's something they never saw coming. They thought you would always come back because you had forgiven before, because you had softened, because you once held on to hope that something better could come from someone who never intended to change. In the script they wrote, you were the one who would never dare to leave. And if you did, it would only be to return with an explanation, a final conversation, a chance for them to reclaim the lead role in your life. But this time you didn't come back. You didn't text. You didn't need them to understand why. There was no goodbye message, no lingering emotional ties. They left no words behind, only an emptiness in the place where they once believed they had a permanent right to exist. And in the moment you disappeared from their story, they finally began to feel loss. Not because they lost you as a person, but because they lost the power they once had over you. They could no longer summon you with a few flattering words. They couldn't make you afraid with a cold message. They couldn't guilt you into changing your mind. You would become someone they could no longer define. You don't need them to play the villain in order for you to be the hero. You simply stepped off their stage with no grand finale, no curtain call filled with tears or rage. You just stopped acting. And when you stopped performing, the entire play fell apart. They once believed they were the center of your world. But now they're no longer the next chapter you're writing. And that realization leaves them confused, angry, and afraid. And what they don't know is that the silence you left behind carries a message louder than any goodbye. I awakened. And I'm rewriting my life with you no longer in it. You don't need to win against them because you've already won. When you no longer needed them to lose. When you move forward, free, strong, and no longer haunted by someone who once controlled your mind. You didn't disappear. You escaped. 9. Part 9, don't wait for justice, become it. You don't need to wait for justice, because this time you are the justice. You once waited for the perfect ending, a day they would wake up, a day they'd realize how much you mattered, a day they'd apologize and say the words you longed to hear. But then came the bitter truth. Justice doesn't come from someone who lives through manipulation. It comes from your decision to stop playing by the rules they created. And in that moment, you changed everything. You no longer waited for apologies. You didn't need validation. You became justice for yourself, not through revenge, but by building a life where they no longer have any role, a life where they no longer control your emotions, distort your reality, or define your worth. Because what hurts them isn't losing you. It's watching you shine without them. You're not waiting for remorse from a heart that's never known regret. Instead, you focus on what they can never take from you. Your growth, your awakening, your courage reclaimed piece by piece from every wound they left behind. You used to be trapped in a cycle of reaction, the lies that kept you awake at night, silence that filled you with fear, two-faced behavior that made you question your own mind. But today, you've stepped out of that storm, a survivor, stronger than ever, no longer the victim searching for truth from the source of chaos. You're the author of truth, writing it with your own life. True justice doesn't arrive when they hurt the way you once did. It arrives when you no longer need them to hurt at all. When they lose the power to wound you, that is the end of their rule. You're no longer seeking balance in a battlefield. You're playing a new game, one where you make the rules of dignity, the rules of boundaries, the rules of someone who no longer crumbles under silence, but rises through self-awareness. You are the justice they cannot escape, not through retaliation, but through the radiant peace they can no longer reach. Part 10, they don't know what to do and you no longer need them. You are no longer a character in their play. They've disappeared from the stage they once controlled. A narcissist always believes they played the lead in your story, that your emotions, decisions, and reactions revolve around them. And for a long time, that was true. Because you loved deeply, hoped endlessly, and believed that if you were patient enough, kind enough, everything would change. But one day, you stopped. Not because you stopped loving, but because you were exhausted from playing a role that was never yours. The role of the one who forgives unconditionally. The role of the one who always gives in, always gets blamed, silently suffers, and gets swept into a script you never agreed to. And what devastates them most is you didn't scream, you didn't curse, you didn't deliver a dramatic finale. You just disappeared. No farewell, no comeback, no tears that could use to guilt you into staying. Only a powerful silence that echoed louder than any goodbye. And that silence, that absence, was the final bell they never expected. You no longer engage in those one last conversations. You no longer pull back by sugar-coated words between waves of toxicity. Now you don't reply. You don't let them shape your emotions with their words. You rewrote the script, and they no longer have a role in it. What truly confuses them isn't that you left. It's that you left without needing them to know, without needing them to understand, without needing their permission. In their world, that is unforgivable. That someone who once belonged to their control could now live a life that excludes them entirely. You became what they can't control, what they can't define, what they can't manipulate, a free soul. And while they scramble through the old shadows, the spaces where they once pulled strings, you've moved on to a place they cannot reach, a place filled with light. Provide a place where they are no longer on the guest list. You don't need revenge. Your disappearance is the ending they can't control, can't explain, and can't use to play the victim one last time. Part 11. Silence is not the end. It's a rebirth. You're not silent because you're weak. You're silent because you are being reborn. In the eyes of a narcissist, silence is just a void that must be filled. They're used to reactions. They're used to arguments, to tears, to endless explanation. They feed on emotional scripts you once unknowingly helped them write. Every message you replied to, every conversation where you gave them a chance to rewrite the story, every tear you shed was fuel for the power they held over you. But this time, you're not falling into that trap. No more responses, no more rebuttals, no more feeling the need to clarify things. And in that silence, you are reclaiming full sovereignty over your soul, quietly but powerfully. They once found strength in the chaos you didn't yet know how to escape. But now you've learned what they never taught you, that the right kind of silence can heal what noise once shattered. You're not silent to suppress your feelings. You're silent to protect them. Silent so no longer feed what once broke you. You can redirect that energy to where it truly belongs within yourself. And just when they expect a battle, emptiness, not out of coldness, but because you no longer need to be heard by someone who never wanted to understand. You no longer need to be seen by someone who only ever looked at you through the lens of their own selfishness. That silence is in the end. It's the space where healing happens, where you reconstruct your heart without them at the center. You step into the world of recovery, quietly, without announcement, but with certainty. You once allowed them to define your worth by how they treated you. Now, you define your worth by the peace you choose to protect. They will search for you in angry glances, in new roles they play, in whispered comments about the past. But you're no longer there, not because you ran away, but because she rose. Your silence is not a disappearance. It is your final declaration. I am alive, and I no longer live in your shadow. Part 12. You don't need to defeat them, only to rise above yourself. You don't need to break them. You only need to rise above yourself. In the past, you believed that to reclaim justice, you had to make them regret it, that they had to feel the pain they once inflicted on you. But through each layer of awakening, through every peeled back wound, you've discovered a powerful truth. The deepest form of revenge is not retaliation, it is transcendence. And when you are no longer bound by the need to be understood, to be apologized to, or to be validated, that is when you are truly free. No longer trying to win a game that was rigged from the start. No longer wasting your breath explaining truth to someone who deliberately distorts it. No longer trying to get someone to see your worth, because you already see it yourself. You walk away not in anger, but in the quiet peace of someone who has reclaimed their own identity. No longer the victim, no longer someone hoping for something from a place that never had anything to give. Now, you live with intention. Emotions no longer ruled by anyone but you. The narcissist may continue playing the same game. They may create new scripts, cast new roles, but you've left the stage for good. You are no longer a part of the system they used to feel powerful. You no longer play the role of the reactive one. You have become the one who chooses. And the beauty of it is, you don't need them to understand that, because you're no longer living for the approval of someone who once denied your reality. You're alive to become the best version of yourself every day. A version no longer imprisoned by pain, but elevated because of it. You don't need to prove that you've won, because you're no longer playing their game. You've chosen silence, peace, independence, and growth. And in that choice, you haven't just escaped them. You've escaped the old version of yourself. The one who didn't know how to set boundaries. The one who thought love meant enduring. Now, you love differently. You love yourself. And that kind of love is the one thing they will never be able to touch. Sometimes, the most powerful message doesn't come from an argument, a screaming match, or a tearful goodbye. It comes from silence, from absence, and from the light you leave behind as you walk away. You don't need to shout that you've awakened. You don't need to prove to anyone that you've changed. You only need to live in alignment with your new truth. And that truth shines so brightly that the one who once manipulated you must squint to see it, but they can never touch it. They'll search for you in the roles you used to play. They'll try the same old tactics, but this time you don't show up. You've stepped off the stage they once directed forever and become the writer of your own story. This isn't revenge. This is freedom. You don't need closure. You don't need them to understand. You don't need any kind of validation from someone who never truly saw who you were. You only need one thing, yourself. And you've come back whole and stronger than ever. And if you've ever felt suffocated in a relationship with a narcissist, if you've ever doubted your worth because of words wrapped in counterfeit love, then remember this: your awakening is the one thing they will never be able to control. And your dear soul, you on your way back to yourself, step by step, in silence, in light, in a quiet strength they will never reach. If what you just heard touched something deep within you, if you're walking the path of healing after emotional abuse, hit that subscribe button. Now, this isn't just a channel, it's a space for healing, for awakening, and for rising together from the ruins. Leave a comment below if you've been through something similar. You are not alone, and your story deserves to be heard. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next video, because in every video, you'll find a piece of yourself being restored. You don't need to be a perfect warrior. You just need to keep walking toward freedom, and we'll walk with you.